Patient seems to be in satisfactory condition. Looks like he suffered minor lacerations, probably in the last 2 hours. There seems to be...
The Arkham games have always been special to me, not because I love Batman, which I do, but mostly just because my name is Bruce, and that adds an extra layer of immersion for me. The main menu sets the tone for the rest of the game. Batman sits atop a Gothic cathedral surrounded by fog. The large moon takes up most of the left side of the frame. Batman, the watchful protector, looks out onto what we assume to be Gotham City. It's so moody, I love it. The game opens with a cutscene. Batman has captured the Joker again and is bringing him back to Arkham Asylum. Through dialogue, the player learns that the Joker's capture was easy and many of the Joker's henchmen have already been transferred to Arkham. How convenient. Now the Joker is acting especially crazy, almost silly even. A bit campy, but overacting is kind of his style. The Joker is comfortable here. This isn't his first rodeo. He greets the inmates and other guards by name as he's strapped in, and Batman suspects something is up. The cutscene ends after this quick exchange, and the player is finally given control of the Dark Knight. Okay, time to pause. This intro so far has been nearly 5 minutes of animated cutscenes, not usually how I enjoy starting a video game. If you remember back to my Uncharted 2 video, the player is given almost immediate control over Drake. However, in Arkham Asylum, the player has to wait a while. My best guess is the player is already familiar with these characters in the setting, but the designers wanted the player to see them through their eyes. They wanted to immerse us in their take on Batman. What does he look like? What world does he inhabit? What's the tone of this iteration of Batman? We'll spend the rest of the game playing it, so let's get the tone of this version. The Joker is escorted through the asylum. The intercom announces his arrival, telling non-essential staff to vacate while he's transferred. Once in the elevator, the player is met with an on-screen prompt to press the trigger button to zoom. Why here, and why this particular control? I found it slightly awkward in the narrow space. Maybe the devs wanted us to take a closer look at the clown prints, and introduce us to one of the more useful scanning mechanics early in the game. But to be honest, it felt odd and kind of forced here. Okay, so fast forward. We escort the Joker and his awful jokes slowly through the rest of the asylum. We hear cheers from his goons, see him scare a doctor while still in cuffs. The escort continues until we reach another elevator and get a hint of what's to come. Killer Croc emerges, smelling Batman and out for blood, giving us a hint as to the enemies lurking beneath. The Joker is taken even further down, more dialogue, more foreshadowing. We learn hundreds of the Joker's men are also in the asylum, and that his capture was easy this time. Another cutscene. We meet Jim Gordon and learn a little more about what transpired earlier in the evening. Now I think it's a good time to pause and rewind a bit. So I normally don't like so much dialogue and the slow pacing. Being forced to walk slowly alongside NPC characters isn't fun, but in this case, I want to argue that it works on a couple of levels. Narratively, the game is all about the asylum. It's the name of the game, for Christ's sake. Anything that happened before this scene is honestly irrelevant. What matters is Batman is in the asylum with his worst enemies. We have simple conflict from the start. As we walk through the asylum, we're also getting a sense of scale. This place is large and deep. As a player, this excited me my first time through. It left a lot of mystery to the place. Where will I go? What enemies will I face? How much of this place will I be able to explore? All these questions popped into my head. I began to build my own story about this place. I'm sure not every player felt this way, but this window into the asylum made me want to explore its depths and face whatever was in there. Also, as a side note, Batman is friggin' huge. He covers nearly half the screen. The player doesn't feel threatened in this place. They are the threat. I think that's dope. Back to the cutscene. We hear a familiar voice and see a pair of black and red shoes watching a security monitor of Batman and Gordon walking through the maximum security area. Our suspicions are mostly confirmed. Something fishy's up. I have to say, I am a sucker for good old comic book in-your-face storytelling. We get cranky guards, more cackles from the Joker, and he springs his obvious trap. Time for Batman to get to work. Finally, combat. On screen, there's a prompt to press the strike button. It stays on screen as the player goes through their first fight. As the player clicks or pushes a button, Batman continues throwing punches. These first enemies keep their distance, allowing the player to feel how fluid and acrobatic the fighting is in this game. Batman glides from enemy to enemy, gracefully beating the snot out of anyone he's facing. Stunned enemies remain on the ground for a few seconds with stars around their heads, signaling a temporary knockout, and they eventually get up. In the next round, the strike prompt disappears and the player clicks on, thumping on thugs until they are truly knocked out. God, it feels good being Batman. There are other indirect prompts from the enemy. Lightning bolts around an enemy's head signal a heavy blow is coming from the enemy, but the player doesn't know how to dodge yet. They're almost forced to get hit in this scenario unless they strike first. Anyway, slow motion cut to Batman thrown down and smashing the face of the last enemy. Sweet. More enemies funnel out and the player is met with a new mechanic. Press Y to counter. So you remember all those lightning bolts we saw earlier? Yeah, they were a clue. The player already knows the timing, now they know what button to press. Kind of an interesting way to teach. Show the when before the how. After the fight, the player is left alone in the room. After a quick look around, there are several places to go. In my first playthrough, I explored the cells and various rooms to the side, but there's one spot that has a slightly different shade of orange light that makes it easy to spot. Venturing near the vent, the player is prompted to open it, and by open, the game means ripping the damn thing off the wall. A blinking B symbol signifies to mash it repeatedly. Inside, Batman discovers a Riddler trophy, the main searchable item in the game. Once Joker's voiceover is finished, the player is free to continue forward. Up the ramp, the player is prompted to aim a batarang by pressing the left trigger and throw using the right. Like most of the games I've looked at and will look at in the future, the game teaches the player to do these things in a safe environment first. There's no threat of death here, no time limits, no pressure. This is important to prevent frustrations later in the game. Frustration will make the player turn off the game, and that's not what designers want. Venturing ahead, we see the Joker's handiwork. We learn the run button and come across the next challenge. More goons, but no prompts. The player's on their own. However, there's a big difference between this fight and the last fight. This time there are only 2 guards, not 3 like earlier. This was on purpose for the player's first non-tutorial test. After beating the snot out of these guys, the player learns that Zsasz is holding a guard hostage, and if he sees anyone come close, especially Batman, he'll kill the guard. The player is forced to find an alternate route. This begins the main tutorial for detective mode and stealth. On-screen graphics prompt the player to use detective mode. The gargoyles glow and prompt the player, along with Batman's baritone inner voice, to press the right bumper to grapple onto a gargoyle. Once on top, he can move from perch to perch, looking for vantage points. More graphics and dialogue prompt the takedown, and once Zsasz has been knocked out, the player sees the stars dancing around his head. And we know what that means from our previous fight. He's not completely out of it yet, but we learn a new combo, the takedown. Pressing the left trigger and Y, Batman friggin' decks him, knocking him out completely. And that ends what I'm calling level 1 of Arkham Asylum. Hope you all enjoyed this quick breakdown. If there's a game I should look at, please leave it in the comments below. Thanks again for watching.